This story was kept top secret by the US military until 2004. The story is so unbelievable, but it's the twist at the end that you'll always remember. Chichijima is a small Japanese island about 500 miles south of mainland Japan. During World War II, the Japanese built a military base on this island. They built 2 radio towers on top of the island's mountains. These towers became crucial for Japanese communication and surveillance in the Pacific. The island was fortified with 25,000 troops and heavy anti-aircraft guns. The Americans wanted to capture this island, but strategists warned that a direct assault would be suicidal. So the Americans decided to only bomb the towers. In June 1944, American aircraft carriers sailed towards Chichijima. Once the island was surrounded, the attack began. The Japanese soldiers fought back fiercely. Despite heavy losses, the American attacks failed. The American leaders were frustrated but could not abandon the mission. In September 1944, another raid was planned. This time, a 20-year-old pilot named George was selected. He was the youngest pilot in the US Navy. George had already flown in several missions before. He had even been shot down once before and survived. At 7:15 a.m., George and his crew took off. He quickly climbed above 8,000 feet. To drop his bombs, he had to dive below that altitude. As soon as he descended, anti-aircraft fire erupted. George's plane was hit by gunfire. Still, he continued his dive. At 3,000 feet, he released 2 500-pound bombs. The bombs hit the radio tower directly, but his plane was engulfed in flames. George tried to steer toward the sea. His crewmates, Ted and Dell, shouted to bail out. But George wanted to get as far from the island as possible. He came dangerously close to the water. Finally, he gave the order, "Jump." George hit his head on the plane as he leapt out. His parachute opened just in time. Below, he saw his plane crash into the sea. But he found no trace of his crewmates. Suddenly, a life raft floated right next to him. He climbed inside and struggled to survive. George kept calling out for his friends, "Ted! Dell!" but they didn't answer. Far away, he saw Japanese patrol boats. They were coming straight for him. George began paddling with all his strength. He kept calling out for his crewmates. He didn't know they were already dead. Exhausted, he collapsed in the raft. Suddenly, he heard a sound in the water. A periscope rose from the water. It was an American submarine. The submarine crew spotted George. They quickly approached him. The sailors pulled him out of the raft. George's life was saved. But the fate of the other 8 American airmen was very different. They were captured by Japanese soldiers. Their true story was hidden for decades. The US never told the public the truth because the reality was too terrifying and gruesome. The remaining 8 American pilots were taken prisoner by the Japanese. The soldiers had suffered months of American bombings. They had grown to hate the Americans. Now they had 8 helpless prisoners. The first prisoner chosen was 19-year-old Marv Mershon. The soldiers beat him all day long. That night he was taken to a freshly dug grave. Marv calmly smoked his final cigarette, and then he was executed. But the true horror began afterward. General Tachibana ordered, "Bring his flesh." A surgeon cut off Marv's thigh and gave it to the cook. The officers and soldiers ate his flesh. They believed it would make them stronger. Days later, 25-year-old Floyd Hall was chosen. The soldiers practiced bayonet drills on him. Then his body was cut open and his liver was removed. 22-year-old Earl Vaughan defiantly shouted, "He too was killed." In the following days, the same fate awaited the others. The remaining 5 prisoners were executed one by one. Some had body parts amputated before death. This was done only to keep their flesh fresh. After the war, the dark secret slowly came to light. 34 Japanese soldiers were convicted of war crimes. General Tachibana and many others were hanged. Their graves remained unmarked. Some soldiers were jailed but released after 8 years. For decades, the world was not told the truth. In 2004, the full story finally came out. At 80 years old, George himself learned the truth. He was filled with deep shock and survivor's guilt. But he did not waste his second chance at life. He became the 41st President of the United States, and his son became the 43rd President. None of this would have been possible if George had jumped just a few seconds earlier. That George was none other than George H.W. Bush. His survival changed the course of history, a single moment's decision that affected the entire world. Think about it. What if George had jumped a few seconds earlier?